Chapter 1. Coming into existence. We begin in the summer of 1969. The Guthrie family were on their way to the beach. As they were listening to the report of the Apollo 11 lunar landing on the radio, the legendary words were spoken by Neil Armstrong. One small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. Some noted it, thinking, they actually did it? They walked on it. They were parked at a stop, giving their car a break, and waiting for their mother, Catherine, who was in a restroom making use of the facility for a while. She was a beautiful long-haired 38-year-old brunette, who had been feeling ill, and needed to tend to her morning sickness, which was how it was best described. She came out and learned of what they heard on the radio. "Sorry, I couldn't enjoy the moment with ya," she said. "My belly hasn't felt well. I wonder if it's a symptom of what I think it is," said Nancy, Catherine Guthrie's second oldest child, who was 19. At this time, they were on their way toward the Jersey Shore in their station wagon. Most of the kids would go on to enjoy the attractions at the nearby boardwalk and their amusement park-style thrill rides. Melinda, who was nearly 21 with blonde hair and a nice normal frame, was the one to always take and gather pictures of these things. You'd have those images of 1. Things such as Nancy going back and forth in some spinning car of a tilt-a-whirl ride, or Jake, the youngest at the time, who was 6 and almost 7, the moment after he lost his balloon, with the disappointment on his face. Their mom throughout the trip usually preferred to stay in the motel room and relax, while their dad, John, was back home enjoying the peace and quiet. After he had learned that his wife was pregnant with their 6th kid, he sat outside and vented to Frosty the dog. He sat there with a beer and cigarette in the ashtray while talking. "Well, Frosty, I was really starting to think, now that Jakey, our youngest, is almost 7, that this was it, and that a family of 5 kids is nice and complete. But no, it don't look like that now. We got a 6th one comin'. I never thought 6 was a number I can handle," he said. "But I guess I'm gonna have to, whether I like it or not," he added while chuckling. Catherine, prior to this pregnancy, had considered a hysterectomy procedure before changing her mind and putting it off. But as time went on, everyone got more excited for this baby. The due date was the following February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Hopefully the new arrival would signal hope of an early spring. A decision had to be made for the baby regarding a name, with one potential name for a girl and one for a boy. If it was a girl, it would be Cynthia, something Catherine thought was pretty, and came close to name her last daughter that, but chose Suzanne, too. Instead, coincidentally, a television show would premiere that fall with the youngest of 6 being named Cindy. The family lived in a red brick row home in a small neighborhood in Knowlton, a development in the town of Newborough, Delaware. The houses on this street, Durban Avenue, or D Street, had shutters with a Z-shaped form out of wood on them on their outside. Their house had limited space but still managed to house a family of 7, going on 8 people. They also made room for a dog and a cat. The dog was mixed breed named Frosty, because of his fluffy white and black fur, and the cat was Sally, an orange tabby. Time went on, and Catherine started to show a baby bump, with some false labor alarms in November and December. Finally, January arrived and the start of a new decade, and they began to anticipate the baby's arrival more anxiously. The family recalled a contest at the local 7-Eleven the year before, in which any mother of a newborn who entered would win if her baby's weight was 7 pounds and 11 ounces. Unfortunately, they discontinued the contest at this point. Catherine went into labor later that month, 4 days before her due date, in the early hours of January 29th. With John waiting outside in the maternity section without sleep for a long time, Catherine successfully delivered a beautiful baby boy at 8:30 a.m. that morning. He was a little bald one, who fussed a little but slept with his eyes closed tight. To the chagrin of some in the family, his weight was indeed 7 pounds and 11 ounces, a little too late for it to pay off in a contest. 3. Images of the baby were captured frequently using Kodak, Nikon or Canon brands of cameras among others, as well as home movies using Super 8 film. It was Mom's preference to use cloth reusable diapers instead of disposable diapers. There were times, unfortunately, that Frosty the dog got his nose into the messy diapers, and as a result, no one wanted to get close to the dog due to how it made him smell. Yet someone would have to eventually clean him up. 3 family members were old enough to drive: John the dad, Melinda and Nancy, and each had to park their cars on the narrow one-way street while they were living there at the time. The closest neighbors were the Stevensons immediately next door on one side, and the Egberts on the other. Dad's car was a used dirty old brown Dodge. Melinda was the one with the Ford station wagon with the wooden panels, but others would drive it at the times they needed to haul lots of groceries or cargo. Nancy's was a fairly new Volkswagen Beetle, whom they just called her Herbie. Over time Catherine bonded with her new baby. She allowed pictures of him being held by her, bathed by her, and resting on a sofa. While he was mostly normal and well-behaved, there were times when care for him was a huge challenge. One evening she heard continuous crying from the baby, which she tried to end with rocking, feeding of a bottle, checking to see if he needed changing, and doing so if necessary, activities that were normal for a newborn. On one evening, where his loud crying proved to be more challenging, Catherine seemed to be on the verge of a breaking point. "I'm gonna throw this baby out the window," she shouted. Two of her older kids heard her, Melinda and Nancy, and quickly stepped in to help her. They immediately recognized the challenge their mom was facing. When all else failed, Melinda gave him an extra serving of formula, and that extra dose seemed to be what it took to finally calm him down. While holding him and rocking him to get him to sleep, he would give her looks of curiosity at times, as if his face was asking, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" It was situations like this that reinforced her belief in the possibility of past lives. From this situation Catherine realized that she could count on many people to assist her in raising her son. She took comfort in that from here on. When the baby was baptized, he would have his oldest sister, Melinda, as his godmother, and Bob, the oldest of the boys in the family, as godfather. Bob was only 15 years old, but he met the requirements to serve as a godparent. They managed to get him baptized in March that year at their local Catholic church. The priest was an old man named Father McGee, and the Newborough Church was one they would remain members of for the rest of their lives. One built just 10 years earlier, but the parish had been around nearly 50 years at the time. The school was one the first 5 kids attended from 1st through 8th grade. It lightly snowed during Easter Mass later that month. 5. John, their father, was employed by a steel company close to their home, at Hook Steel Corporation. At times he found himself working several different shifts, including overnight ones. When necessary, he would work doubles, or even triple shifts into the overnight hours, requiring him to catch up on sleep during the day, or early evening. It was a necessary evil for having the money to provide for a house consisting of 8 people, 2 pets, food on the table, and a dirty old brown car. At this point in the year 1970, much of the attention was on the new addition, baby Kenny. The youngest daughter, Suzanne, at first was not happy about a new baby boy, preferring a girl thinking one would be better, and knowing how bratty Jake could be. But once she gazed upon Kenny, she saw how adorably beautiful he was, and had a change of heart. She went on to be just as loving and protective as a sibling as the others over time. The baby would face normal issues as any other. He would cry at night and have to be relaxed in order to sleep. These methods included a simple bottle, a pacifier, and when all else failed just moving around and being gently rocked back to sleep. Catherine found that a good method was either playing or singing the song They Long to Be Close to You from the Carpenters, since little Kenny found it to be a soothing way to fall back to sleep. 6. By the time he got to his big brother Jake's 8th birthday in August, he was up more, moving, and smiling more often. He still, however, needed regular naps in the daytime. The need for this nap resulted in his first close call in life one day. Melinda needed to head out to pick up spring water in her car. She wanted to bring Ken along, but learned of his napping at that moment. Instead she settled for just traveling with her friend Mary Ann, as well as little brother Jake, who had just turned 8, and their cousin Sarah Ann, who was 6 years old. Her friend Mary Ann McKenna had known Linda many years through their mothers, as she was Maggie Davis's daughter. Maggie often got together with Catherine for parties and trips to the races. Mary Ann had long dark hair and wore glasses, had a nice smile, but somewhat uneven teeth, and was 25 at this time. This trip by car resulted in a serious accident, where Melinda's car had its brakes fail, and ended with a collision in Media, Pennsylvania. She was able to note that this was about to happen as she stepped on the brake, while descending down the road, and was able to warn Jake and Sarah Ann by shouting, "Get down on the floor." There were no seatbelt laws or requirements at this time, so they did not make use of them at this point in time. Mary Ann saw the collision coming and started screaming. The collision occurred at the bottom of a hill with no other cars involved, but ending up with Melinda's car smashed up against a pole. Fortunately, everyone was alive and conscious. Melinda found herself hitting her head on the steering wheel and bleeding in parts of her face, resulting in a loss of teeth, which needed replacing with implants. Mary Ann got an injury on her leg from a bottle on 7. The floor of the car, while Jake and Sarah Ann got bumps in their heads, but nothing worse. They had just commented on what a shame it was that Kenny could not cone with them, but now noticing the situation, They were glad he didn't since, as a baby, he had a tendency to stand up on the seats of a car while traveling. As there were no laws governing infants or toddlers at this time while traveling by car. Just moments before the accident, Sarah Ann had commented on what a shame it was that Kenny wasn't with them, since she would have liked to have bonded with me on the way. However, considering what happened, they were glad he wasn't. 8. Chapter 2. The Neighborhood and Extended Family. The people surrounding the Guthries had interesting backgrounds themselves. The Stevensons were very similar to them in their family makeup, with a father and mother, and a bunch of siblings living with them in a crunched house. They had a Chevy Bel Air which was always parked behind the Guthries' first car on block. Kurt, one of the sons, would sometimes stop by and ask, "Hey, Mrs. Guthrie, can I use your phone?" And it wasn't a problem for her. Kurt had a thick mustache, wore floral shirts often, and had a feminine demeanor in his personality. The Egberts on the other side next door consisted of a mom and some young adult kids, who were more of the hippie types, enjoying or blasting rock and roll, more ready to challenge or defy authority, and condemn things like the Vietnam War, critical of Presidents Johnson and Nixon on what they've done to lead their country there. Yet they always remained friendly with the Guthries next door. The extended family at this time consisted of several aunts and uncles, young Kenny's grandparents on her mother's side, his cousins, and others. His maternal grandmother and grandfather were still around and living in Aston, Pennsylvania. His father's parents were both deceased. His grandparents on his mother's side were living in an old house in Aston, Pennsylvania, and they consisted of Grandmom and Grandpop Patterson, Cousin Sarah Ann, Uncle Ed, and Aunt Rosemary. There was also extended family not living in the house at the time. There were also Ken and his siblings' great 9 grandparents, Claude and Mabel Benning, and his mother's siblings and their families, uncles Bob, Bill and Chuck, along with their wives and kids. Right after Kenneth's birth, Grandpop Charles Patterson gave the family 2 1968 Kennedy $50 as knickknacks to remember the moment. At home, Bob, Suzanne, and Jake were the ones still attending school, with Bob set to graduate from high school in the class of 1972. As young Kenny grew, he found himself developing at a normal pace. He was crawling, smiling, posing for pictures in big sunglasses, and finally walking before his first birthday. At his first Christmas, one of the neighbors, Donald, got him a nice yellow car that he could fit inside and pretend he was driving. Everyone a while just claimed that it came from Santa Claus. The holidays were a time for extended family and friends of his mother to get together with the Guthries. One close friend of his mother's was a woman named Winifred Mertz. She was in her 30s at Ken's first Christmas, and brought her kids along to get together with the family. Often her kids consisted of Jerry, Mark, and Sherilyn Mertz. The Guthries did not see much of Jerry and Mark at this time, except at maybe Christmas or big holidays and get-togethers, but Sherilyn, who was youngest and 2 years old in 1970, would come with Winnie often during her visits to Catherine. Winnie worked as an assistant to the priests in the local parish church, once lived near the Guthries, and would drop in when she was done working in the middle of the afternoon. She was recently divorced from Jerry Sr., and was friends with Catherine for a long time at that point. She wore many wigs representing the style at the time, and was very outspoken about issues of the time. 10. She and Catherine would talk and enjoy coffee and cigarettes often during the visit. Sherilyn was getting familiar with the new baby Kenny, one of the few people just barely smaller and younger than her that she knew of at this time in her life. Sherilyn was a cute kid with long blonde golden hair, and was very energetic. Within time, Kenny would get introduced to activities that involved Fisher-Price toys, learning the alphabet with the help of items the family would buy at Kitty World, where they regularly visited for a visit from Santa Claus by helicopter. Other times he would keep occupied by being placed in front of the TV to watch Sesame Street. It always aired on Channel 12 regularly after General Hospital on Channel 6, which Catherine always watched. Within time, in the year Ken turned 2 years old, he began to experience loss of someone, or something close to him. The family dog, Frosty, went walking with Ken and his sister Melinda one day, when Frosty wasn't paying attention, a car struck him with its tire, leaving little opportunity for the dog to avoid it. It happened right in front of the two of them. A group of boys immediately went up to check on Frosty, and just flat out said, "He's dead." Just from the condition of the dog's body, they could tell. And just from that one mistake, they would be without their pet. Soon afterward they buried him in the woods adjacent to their house. The wooded area was one that the family introduced Ken to early on in life. He even found his own rock to climb in one section of the main trail through there, which they called Kenny's Rock. It was about 4 feet in diameter, and curved upward about 3 feet, formed out of a material resembling Dedham granite. Frosty would be replaced by a 11 black puppy named Duchess, who was only with the family a few months since they couldn't control her. Later, they got a puppy who was a brown lab beagle mix, right after her birth in February 1973, whom they named Buffy. Buffy would spend her whole dog life with the family. At the age of 2, Ken would regularly enjoy a baby's bottle filled with juice. He would regularly request it from his mother, and if she were sitting in the living room resting, simply say, "Go ask Melinda." That he would do, which Melinda would prepare, with bringing it back, and cuddling next to his mother with his hands stroking through her hair as he drank. It was a beautiful bond at that moment of mom and toddler. Ken occasionally would see his father's siblings at times. They consisted of Aunt Cassandra, Uncle Barney Samuel, or Bus as they called him, and Uncle Bob, Robert Guthrie. They were always happy when they got to see Ken, and Ken would notice that one of them met an early death at a fairly young age, Uncle Bob. At 46, Ken was 2 years old at the time when Bob developed esophageal cancer which spread rapidly, and would soon claim his life. He had been a heavy drinker and smoker throughout his life, and was exposed to many things that could have contributed to the cancer. They had funeral services for him and put him in his military attire for the casket, as he was a veteran of World War II. Ken joined the family to attend the service when he was about 2 months shy of his 3rd birthday, seeing his uncle laid out, assuming he was sleeping. When people heard the little 2-year-old Ken say that he was sleeping caused them to break down in 12 tears silently. As for Ken's dad John, even though he was devastated to lose a brother in his 40s, he never visibly expressed sadness in front of Ken. John Guthrie showed an occasional interest in politics. He noticed a new up-and-coming candidate running against Delaware Senator J. Caleb Boggs, a young guy who may care for working guys like him, Joseph R. Biden, and may bring the kind of change he was looking for. "I get a good vibe from him," John said. "The only thing is he's just, 29 years old? Christ, he's not that much older than our oldest kid. In fact, I think he is the same age as my niece Nell." Catherine also saw some promise in the man. They were shocked to learn of the accident which cost him his wife and daughter's lives, and left his small sons critically injured. They made sure they didn't talk too much about those sad events among the little ones. Ken would have difficulty understanding the concept of death, as he even just recently had a hard time distinguishing being dead with being asleep. As young Ken grew, certain activities became a ritual for him, particularly annual things, such as trips to the beach during the summertime. His sister Melinda was able to save up enough through her job at ICI to put money toward a vacation at the Jersey Shore for week-long visits. In 1973, they booked a place in Margate, New Jersey, called the White Sands. At first it seemed odd for 3-year-old Ken to be away from home for multiple days, and he would inquire, "When do we go home?" Still, he managed to enjoy the swimming and activities of the trip. It was one that consisted of everyone in the immediate family except Bob, who was too busy, but included their cousin Sarah Ann, and Suzanne's friend back home, Debbie Spisak. 13. By the time Ken was 3 years old, he could count on a certain group of kids to be there, to keep him occupied. He had his next-door neighbor's kids, Sam, to whom Suzanne gave the nickname Sambo Mealy, and young John Jacobs, who, after a period of time didn't like being called John and preferred just John instead. And of course he had Sherilyn, who came over with her mother for brief visits and big parties. Ken would need help from his friends at his birthday parties early in his life to open his presents for him. His trips to movies were mostly to kid-friendly films, including many animated ones and musicals. His sisters one day decided to take him to a screening of Jesus Christ Superstar on the big screen, which they had seen in New York on stage a little while back. They noticed Kenny getting emotional at the scenes with Mary Magdalene singing the tempering words, "Close your eyes and relax." He broke out crying out loud seeing Jesus, played by Ted Neely, closing his eyes asleep, since the music it preceded was so moving. As Yvonne Elliman sang "I Don't Know How to Love Him," Nancy and Melinda figured it may have been a mistake to bring him, since they had to take him out twice for crying in the theater during nighttime sleeping scenes. After seeing the movie, Ken came to the assumption that Jesus's full name was Jesus Christ Superstar, having a first, middle, and last name. He would hear older people take his name in vain. His mother might say, "Jesus," if something startled her. His father and Winnie would normally say, "Christ." Then there were the times they combined them and said, "Jesus Christ." An example of that would be when Dad rushed to clean a spill on the kitchen table, in which a person would urge him to get it quick before it ran onto the food. 14. Yet he noticed no one ever exclaimed, "Superstar," as an interjection. He wondered why. A young baby of a French family employed Nancy and Sue's services to watch their 1-year-old child Shushu. His real name was Sebastian. He had dark hair and smiled a lot. Ken took a shine to him and goofed off in front of him to make him laugh sometimes. He would of course have to keep quiet while he was sleeping. Ken's closest female friend at age 3 was Sherilyn. Shortly after remarrying in 1973, her mother allowed Ken and his family over, and the two would have play dates. It didn't faze Ken much that the house they had was bigger and nicer, but Sherilyn wanted him to join her playing games, playing with Fisher-Price figures, and showing him the nice stairway and banister she could slide down. "Check this out, Ken," she said, while sitting on the top of the stairway banister. "Oui," she said as she slid down. She did it over again a few times. "You think you want to try it?" she asked Ken. He just nodded no. "No? Okay, maybe when you get bigger." She being 5, and Ken being 3. Size made a difference. Ken decided to try sliding down the banister at his house, but it was too thin and steel, and couldn't hold him, leading him to just tilt over, luckily landing on the side where the steps are, and not over the edge where he would be more seriously hurt. He would soon attempt to push himself, and see how many steps he could skip while jumping down. Jake had his friend Willie Darrow to keep him occupied. He would spend the night at the Guthrie house often, packing his clothes in a brown paper bag whenever he came over. The two enjoyed riding 15 bikes together and pretending to play cops and robbers, posing as the cops from the TV show Adam 12. Willie joined them for some day trips to the movies, the beach, or to the park, like Valley Forge, where the family would go, sometimes getting little Ken to pose in the entrance of a cabin, in which he wasn't comfortable alone, as he got scared of the dark background, worrying that someone or something would pop out from behind. Willie would also go swimming with Ken and Jake during summers. He could also be trusted to watch Ken when others couldn't. He would help in getting Ken to come down from the front yard tree that his parents didn't like him climbing, and in similar situations. One of the fears Ken had at that age was being alone in places like the kitchen at night and suddenly hearing a strange noise. At the kitchen it was usually an alarm going off. He would shout, "Ah, come out in the kitchen, somebody." Halloween at this age would be the earliest Ken would remember. Melinda bought him a devil mask with a smock costume and pitchfork to go with it. He showed it off to his mother and joked with her. "Mommy, say what the devil?" His mom answered, "What the devil? What the me?" was his punchline that got the laughs. He went trick or treating like a normal child, with his brother Jake dressed as an old woman in a dress and his cousin dressed as Tiger Lily. He collected a lot from the several streets in the small neighborhood community in his plastic candy bag. After getting home, he started to eat up right away without worrying about inspecting it. 16. This was also the age when Christmas and Easter were the most exciting times for Ken. He went to bed one Christmas Eve, being told that he needed to go to sleep. All was quiet when he could hear a ho 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 down the stairs. Nancy pointed it out and quietly whispered, "Aw, did you hear that?" But it turned out to be Bob. But Ken would believe it to be Santa for years. Gifts under the tree may consist of a tricycle, a big wheel, and little wheel for Jake and Ken respectively, or a toy cash register with play money that looked like Monopoly money. The Fisher-Price figures and sets always stirred Ken's imagination the most. He would imitate the characters with a falsetto sound in his voice, and pretend some were family and friends. He also noticed the different colors of certain figures, and wasn't sure who to delegate in the role of the darker ones, since there wasn't anyone really close he could think of. He may pretend the female ones were his sisters, or Sherilyn or Sarah Ann. With the black characters it was suggested that he could say it was Jake's friend Willie. Even though he wasn't black, he had the more olive complexion, compared to Ken's Irish more freckled family members, so naturally an unfiltered imagination might cause him to say he's the chocolate one. Ken also was exposed to the character Archie Bunker from time to time. Seeing him and hearing his terminology for people who were different from him caused him to assume that certain words were acceptable. Whenever Ken heard someone described as colored, his first assumption was that he was literally multicolored on the surface, and therefore didn't understand or grasp it right away. But he always noticed his father, or his sisters, or mother laughing hard at episodes of that. 17. Chapter 3. Ken's understanding of boys versus girls. January of 1974 seemed like just another month, with the exception of Match Game changing its from Match Game 73 to Match Game 74. There weren't many differences. Ken liked Sesame Street after his mom caught General Hospital. Babies were being born and people were dying every day. with one particular birth of a baby girl in Illinois to a 24-year-old mother, who would impact Ken's life 18 years later. Another birth was occurring which would impact Melinda's life in the more immediate future. The birth of her friend Mary Ann's baby meant that she would have to help her out with the child. Melinda found herself babysitting Mary Ann's newborn little daughter, Marie Elizabeth. It was Ken's earliest memory of a baby girl. Not long prior to this, Ken could remember getting potty trained. In learning how to do number one, he'd ask his mom or sister if they had to do the same thing. "We do it a little different, because girls don't have wieners," they both had said. Ken found it hard to believe. "But how do they pee-pee?" he asked. "Sitting down," Melinda said. He still could not fathom it, or get it. One day while watching little Marie, Melinda noticed her getting fussy and crying. A bottle didn't seem to stop her this time, and she realized it must be because of her wet diaper. So she decided to change her, with her mom and Ken present. When the diaper came off, Catherine turned to little 4-year-old Ken and said, "Kenny, where's her wiener?" She pointed out, "Where's your wiener?" She turned to the baby and comically asked, 18. Ken had a surprised look on his face when he saw, "Wow, girls really don't have wieners," he thought. When Nancy would take home movies with her movie projector, it was always fascinating for folks to watch. Even though they were silent, Ken could watch the moving captured images of his family, friends, and himself with that fascination after they developed. When she showed the movies to the family groups, it was always exciting to watch in the dark. They were so fuzzy, amateur and dated, but great at capturing the moments. The smell of the equipment, including the projector, the reels, and the screen were also very memorable and carried that ever-brand newness to them, especially the screen when it rolled out of the cylinder to spread out on the tripod. Even more fascinating to Ken was watching the world he knew on the film freeze and move backwards. There was something magical about seeing people move backwards, and instead of fall down, fly upward like magic. Nancy would go on to travel to California with her friend Jan from March to August the year he turned 4, which left one less sibling in the mix of his childhood activities to have fun with and go places with for a while. She had hoped to find some better career opportunities there. His oldest brother Bob would reflect the same fascination with backwards things which Ken observed in the home movies. He called Kenny by his name backwards, with the phonetic syllables Niken, and would pretend to sneeze by going chua instead of achoo. It got in Ken's nerves after a while, and he requested that he just call him Kenny. 19. "Okay, Ni Ken," Bob responded. "No, I'm not listening to you," Ken said before putting his hands up to his ears. Bob would just boldly go up to Ken and remove his hands from his ears and say, "Ni Ken, Ni Ken, Ni Ken, Nu Ken." Ken would then put his hands right back up to his ears and shout, "Kenny, Kenny, Kenny, Kenny." Bob could be the daring one with Ken without really hurting him. He would sit him on his shoulders when he was small enough, and even stick him in the refrigerator once for a few moments. He would remember that brief moment of darkness, but not have enough time to panic before he got him out. Later Bob learned that he could say his name backwards a different way, calling him Enoch, but this was a term Jake would go on to use more frequently. This same fixation for reverse things, which also including counting both forward and backwards to and from 10 on Sesame Street, inspired Ken to learn the alphabet both forward and backwards. Jake, the middle brother, often followed Bob's example of being very daring around Ken, but was more reckless at it. Since they shared a bedroom, he could scare Ken at his most sensitive moments at night. Chapter 4. Accidents happen. Ken had a swing set and slide in his backyard. He would keep occupied having fun with Jake and Buffy the dog many days, and sometimes he would have fun by himself. One day, when Jake and Ken were playing on the swinging glider, Ken fell head first, wound up with a bleeding head underneath his still swing glider. Jake reacted with a loud panic which Melinda could hear from the kitchen. Fearing that Ken may be unconscious of not dead, she felt relief when she started to hear Ken cry. 20. Ken began to wander into the house while screaming, crying, and bleeding. He looked back to see Jake with his hand on his head. Thinking he was hurt too, Ken realized it was just "I need your gesture" check made from being upset. Thinking, "What have I done?" When his parents saw him, there was a brief debate whether they should take him to an emergency room. After concluding that Ken needed a doctor, they gave him some cloths, and later a bandage to stop the bleeding on the way to the hospital. They got there with luckily a short week. Found a doctor who was dark-haired and balding with a mustache. Asking what he had here, the doctor was informed by his mother. He fell off the glider. "Oh no, that's not good," he said in a relaxed tone, while removing the bandage they put on his head. He took Ken in for some x-rays to see if there was a concussion or internal bleeding. But it was mostly a flesh injury, with no serious apparent fractures to the skull. The procedure that was needed involved stitches, which would be the first experience getting them which Ken would remember. He fussed very minimally while they stitched his head up with 12 stitches, including the doctor saying, "Okay, Kenny, and I'll just go round and round the head there, and we're done," he said while playing a bandana-like bandage. Chapter 5, Recovery and Anniversary Party. The injury would be one Ken would recover from thankfully. It was one instance Sue, and later her daughter Amy, would think of as an example of Kenny bumping his head too many times trying to explain his weird behavior later on as he got older. He got the bandage off in time to attend his grandparents' 50th anniversary party in a hall which was rented out. Grandma and Grandpa Patterson had been married since 1924, both at very young ages. Ken's mother got a seat at the table next to the guest of honor, which were her parents along with her own grandmother. Ken's great-grandmother on the other side sitting, at 86, got the privilege of living to see her own daughter celebrate her golden anniversary. Ken was wandering around the floor, and decided to grab a Kodak camera, and aimed at his mother. "Smile, Mom," he said, managing to get a cute smile from her as he clicked it, while she was sitting down. Looking back, he was surprised not to hear her say, "Hey, put that down." She must have been in a good mood at that moment. The picture turned out to be a little crooked, but it managed to also capture his great-grandmother next to her, looking in his mom's direction. Many cousins were attending as well, including Sarah and Patty, who are 10 and 11 years old respectively. Also, the two youngest babies of their grandchildren Norris and Dennis, who are still not yet walking, having to restart first birthdays or present. Kenny was wearing his red polo shirt and plaid pants, which were in style at that time. Ronnie would grow to be a cousin Ken got fairly close to, and excited to see. When he got to be 2 years old, he'd be able to offer Ken his fruit-striped gum, the kind that advertised itself as tickling anyone's tongue. He would even get out of control once, and took chalk to draw on Ken's shirt. His mother had to make him stop. Chapter 6, Vacations and Family Gatherings. When Ken was 4, in the month of July, they take a second overnight summer trip to the Jersey Shore, to Atlantic City. He had been going through a phase of calling people food, based on what he could associate with them, or just randomly think of, mostly condiments. For example, Jake would be ketchup, because he liked the color red. Ken was mustard, because it was his favorite condiment, and Suzanne was tomato, because he saw her drink tomato juice. They all stayed at the Lincoln Roosevelt Motor Inn. Ken was learning to enjoy the vacation more than I did previously. The parents joined the 6 kids early in the years of traveling to the Jersey Shore. Catherine was always having to worry about Ken wandering off alone and getting lost. Before one of his sisters would take him somewhere, she needed to remind them to watch. "Don't take your eye off of him," she said. Ken took it literally, wondering where any eyeballs were on his body, but the sisters knew and remembered which was what was important. At the pool, where the family was staying, Ken was still too little for the deep parts, so he stuck to the kiddie pool when by himself. A young African-American girl about his age started talking to him. They played a few games, and sure what they could do in the water together. He didn't ask her what her name was at first. When the family saw Ken playing with her, they asked what the little girl's name was. Ken, not wanting to admit he didn't know, just randomly came up with the name Pickles after the food. "What? Pickles? Ha ha ha," said Melinda. After hanging out and talking with her, Debbie decided to ask her name with Ken there. "Veronica?" she said. "Kenny, you were being silly," Debbie said. "Her name isn't Pickles, it's Veronica." Veronica heard it, and she laughed. At one point, Ken was craving the Kentucky Fried Chicken on the table close to dinner. He followed Melinda out the door, asking, "Melinda, can I eat supper?" He asked over and over again, following her out the door, and to the end of the hotel floor. He got in trouble when Sue saw him outside as she said, "Get in here." Weeks after the vacation, sadly, that summer, their great-grandmother, Mabel, I was just at the anniversary party weeks earlier, passed away of natural causes. She was born in January 1888, and died that year 1974. This would be the second time in Ken's 4.5 years of life that he would attend a wake service. They still did not refer to people as dead around him. When he could see them laid out, he would ask, "Mom, why are we all talking so quiet?" "Because Grandmom Benning is sleeping over there." Sheesh. This time, when Ken saw her, he noticed her body looked different, being embalmed. She reminded him of a wax statue that he saw in the wax museum. He saw his mom's parents there, all dressed up, Grandma and Grandpa Patterson, who said hi to him. The minister's eulogy was based on a theme of God being light, and Mabel being able to finally come face to face with that light. She could now also join her husband Clyde, who predeceased her, and death 4 years earlier. Over the course of 5 months, March to August, Ken was missing Nancy, and felt the huge void of not having her home as she and Jan were out in California. The only contact was through expensive long-distance calls, of postcards. When she finally came home in August, it was early morning before sunrise, and the first one to greet her was Buffy, running up to her, with her tail wagging. Ken was awake and excited like a kid on Christmas Eve, knowing she'd be home that day. "Hi Buff," were the first words he could hear downstairs, while sleeping in his mother's bed that particular night. "Who's that?" she said to show excitement. They immediately went down to greet her in a celebratory mood. "Hi Kenners, how you doing?" she shouted as she picked Ken up and hugged him. "Did you miss me?" Ken nodded his head yes. "Oh, I missed you too." She showed off her souvenirs and toys, banners, and coloring books she got for Ken along the way. "I got you and Jake some banners, shirts, sticker books like the Brady Bunch, coloring books, including one with the Indians, and all kinds of things." The family would pay another visit to Atlantic City, mainly for a visit to Steel Pier. There was a giant needle ride, which served as a rising observation deck which overlooking the beach. It was on this trip that Ken experienced his first loosened tooth as a result of biting a taffy that was too hard. It caused him pain and to cry, needing comfort. They tried to encourage and comfort him, suggesting another ride on the needle. But Ken was feeling some pain from the tooth. "The needle will make it feel better," Sarah Ann said, as a sort of placebo method to help calm Ken down. It seemed to work after the ride. His mouth did indeed feel better, but he had to stay away from hard solid foods, only sticking with soft foods and liquids. They headed back to the house that Nancy and Jan decided to rent out at the shore. Ken was hungry at this point, and they suggested pizza. Nancy pulled out frozen pizza and put it in the oven. "Is my pizza ready?" Ken asked. "It's cookin'," said Nancy. "Is my pizza ready?" Ken asked seconds later. "It's cooking," said Nancy again. Ken was really antsy to get some food in his body despite a sore tooth. It was finally ready after a few minutes, and Ken wasted no time devouring the slice of pizza he got. After a few bites he noticed that his tooth came fully out, and he was bleeding in the gum area from where it came. He started to whine, and they got the loose tooth. "I told you not to gimme pizza," Ken said with a sense of sarcasm, hoping they sensed it. It was one of his front teeth which they saved for under his pillow in exchange for a quarter from the tooth fairy. Chapter 7. Health and Wellness. Ken's medical conditions were mostly normal for a child. He would see a pediatrician regularly named Dr. Ingrid Odell. She had a grayish beehive for hair, wore steel glasses, and spoke with a professional but fading southern accent. He would see her for regular routine visits, get checked, and get shots in the arm or shoulder. It was usually nothing too invasive. The family would have to monitor Ken's asthma and give updates on his progress. For some reason, he would be too shy to utter a word around Dr. Odell early in his life. He usually simply shook his head yes or no, responding to her questions. His father or sister usually spoke for him. After a while, he worried that she would get the wrong impression of him. "This is the boy who doesn't talk?" she said to her new assistant once. Hearing this made him do an about-face on future visits and actually start being more verbal. The doctor was shocked but proud when she heard Kenny talk. Sometimes at home he would get sick with wheezing, which would cause worry that his asthma may act up. The solution, however, was usually just bed rest and liquid wheeze medicine, prescribed by Dr. Odell. Ken did have a brief bout around this time period with sticky eyes. One weekend morning, he woke up only about to open one eye. He wasn't sure what was wrong until he saw himself in the mirror. He bore the resemblance of someone who had a stroke or some allergic reaction, but it took a while for anyone to notice without his mentioning it. Willie happened to be staying at the house for an overnight visit that morning, with himself and Jake engaging in some horseplay. "Hey, Jake, look at his eye," he said. "What happened there?" asked Jake. "I just can't open it, it feels stuck shut," he said. "You should probably show mommy that," Jake told Ken. But Ken just waited until she woke up. In the meantime, he tried rubbing it and washing it, but nothing seemed to work. When his mom saw it, she said, "Give it time throughout the day, and eventually I'm sure it'll open on its own." It did by dinner time, gradually, and without Ken feeling it. "There, see? I told you would open again," said his mother at the dinner table. In the months to come, after the summer when he was 4, Ken would go through some volatile phases. He was able to learn the alphabet both forward and backwards. He always struggled backwards when reaching the middle, often forgetting the letter R, but could pull off the beginning and end of the alphabet with acceleration. One of the hippie friends of the Egbert family heard him say it and was fascinated. "Groovy," he said. "I'll bet your mom and dad really dig having a little sucker as smart as you for a son. That is so far out, man." Some of the neighbors would constantly try and get Ken to show off that skill many times, and he only got faster and better. Chapter 8. Ken's friends and his aggressive side. On the downside, he was starting to take disciplining small children into his own hands. There were actually times when he would see a baby crying or fussing, and go up and smack it, making it cry harder. It would make him feel like a little big shot in his mind, but his family was not happy about it. When Willie Darrow heard about him hitting a baby down the street, he told Jake, and Jake's response was, "Aw, maybe I should hit you, but mommy probably will when she hears about it, brat." One of Ken's fits occurred when he wanted a bowl of Kix cereal. He saw the image on the box which contained blueberries to go with the crispy corn puff cereal, and wanted exactly that. When he emptied the box in his bowl, he saw that there were no berries, and he got upset and kept pouring in vain until he found some, thinking they may be at the bottom. "I want my cereal to have these on it," he cried, pointing to the berries on the box. Jake and Suzanne had to get mom and dad to help restrain Ken at that point. Ken would also wander through the houses and yards of neighbors without asking or being invited. Once he reached the end of an alley of one of his neighbors only to be greeted with large, mean-looking barking dogs, and it caused him to dart straight back out. "Those doggies will bite you back there," the lady of the house said. He found a good friendship bond with Tara Eckert, who lived on his block. A young child named Ray Ritchie, who was a year and a half. Ken's junior, got to playing with him often. Ray, however, would be one of the Vic of Ken's bad habit child hitting. When in his backyard, Ray started crying after being hit, and Sue could hear. She opened the back door, asking what's the matter. "Your brother hit me," said Ray. "Kenny, you better knock it off, or you'll get in big trouble again." "Raymond, go ahead," and hit him back. Ray would then smack Ken back with his tiny hands. Surprisingly, Ken and Ray would be best buddies for a few years after that. Another group of families lived on the street that paralleled the Guthries. Cooper Avenue, or C Street as they called it, was the street, resulting in neighbors' yards being adjacent to the Guthries' yard. Ken befriended a family of boys called the Mosses, consisting of Jeffrey, Bobby, and Kenny, the group that lived immediately adjacent to Ken, and also Sean Muller, an only child who lived next door to the Mosses. He was a little older than Ken, having very light blonde hair which he let go for long periods without cutting. From looking at him from behind, it was sometimes hard to tell his gender. Once Ken flat out asked him, "Are you a girl?" "No, I'm a boy," he simply answered. He and Ken would find time to play in each other's yards. Jeff Moss next door was closest to Ken's age, but was the more assertive and tough one of those kids. If he saw Kenny try and go over into his yard or climb into his family's tree, he would let him know that's not right. "Hey, get out of our tree, Kenny," he shouted. Sometimes Ken would move onto Sean's tree in his yard instead, climbing the back fence to get to it. Sean's mother, Mrs. Muller, had to keep her eyes open for Ken's sake. "Kenny, the doggies are in the backyard. Better watch out," she said. Her voice was distinguishable as being low, not so feminine and typical of the regional accent. Of course, she would never allow her dogs to actually attack a small kid like Ken, but she found it to be a good method to keep Ken out, using the dog's big intimidating looks to sort of repel Ken away from her yard. In reality, the dogs were more tame than their appearance suggested, at their worst literally barking instead of biting. Throughout his downtime, Ken would do his usual wandering looking for things to do. He stumbled across some of his friends playing cowboys and Indians. Desiring to check it out, he moved through the front lawn of the house of John's family.